Hey, welcome to Guitar Knobs, the guitars, gear, noise, and nonsense podcast, hosted today by these knobs.
Tony Dudzik, Pick Guardian.
Hey everybody, it's me, Todd Novak. Welcome to the Guitar Knobs podcast. We're thrilled to death that you're listening to our show. Oh boy, do we love doing this. And one of the biggest reasons I love doing this is because I get to do it with people that I really like. And
what about me?
Unfortunately, I've got Tony here today, so he's going to have to substitute to do. No, I love Tony, of course. But we also have a return. We've got this is a three-peat for this gentleman, and I think it's a three-peat. It's not a four-peat, is it?
It's four-peat.
Okay, it's a four-peat.
One more, and he gets the corduroy jacket.
Yes,
that's all we can afford.
Yes,
we can't.
We had to sell the elbow patches though, so it might get a little drafty. Got to keep the show going. So this is going to be very, very cool because we got. Who are you, sir?
Chris Gill.
Chris Gill. Chris Gill. What are you famous for?
Oh, well, I can't talk about that, but I've been writing about guitars for various guitar magazines for the past, oh my gosh, was it now 32, 33 years?
Yes.
So I have to pour one out for Guitar Player Magazine, rest in peace.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys heard, but it's really sad that, the print version's been killed, and who knows how long the so-called online version will last, but it's, what an end of an era. I mean, that was my beginning as just a reader. And then of course my beginning as a journalist, guitar journalist too. So
yeah.
Then Guitar World magazine and, in between and before various artist rep jobs, in the 80s, I worked for Roland, US, their US distributor of Roland. And then I worked, in the late 90s for Digital Design, Pro Tools, the whole advent of the digital recording phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. It's just a fad.
It'll never catch on.
No, it won't. And then also the co-author with Brad Tolinsky of the book on Eddie Van Halen.
That's right, and that's how you got into our show.
It is, exactly. Eruption Conversations with Eddie Van Halen. It's a perennial. We're actually quite pleased that it's in and out of the Amazon Top 100 rock books consistently. It's just been selling. I mean,
that's awesome.
Not to get into the weeds with the book publishing industry, but usually you put a book out, it's out for a couple months, and then they do what they call remaindered, and it goes on the sale bin in the front of the store or the back of the store, depending on if you even go to a store anymore.
Right.
But the book's remained in print, and they've done. Haven't done any revisions or anything like that, but they've done several printings of it so far. So it's still going strong, and we're coming up on, is it the third year of it? I guess already.
Wowzers!
Yeah,
fantastic. Mm. And not to mention all of your accolades as a creative person, as a writer, but you have extensive knowledge of guitar pedals and Japanese guitar wares of all kinds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm an addict. I can't even remember when I guess it goes way back to when I was, my first guitar was a great guitar. It was a 65 Gibson SG Standard back in the good old days of the mid 70s when you could pick these things up for a couple $100. So that was cool. Great guitar to start with. But when I decided to buy a brand new guitar, I lived in northern San Diego County. I dutifully went up to Los Angeles, went up a few hour drive because that's where the better music stores were. And they had, 30% discounts and whatever. And I really wanted a BC Rich. And I got to the store, Ace Music in Santa Monica, and the guy said, you don't want a BC Rich. The necks suck, blah, blah, blah. He gave me all these reasons why I didn't want one. So he said, but here, let me show you some other guitars we got. And one of the guitars he showed me was a 3-pickup Les Paul Custom, which I thought, this is really cool, but I've already got a Gibson with 2 humbuckers, and,
mm-hmm.
It's kind of the same territory. Not exactly, but pretty close.
Sure.
And I was just in this mode. It was the 70s, man. It's like that's when, guitars had all kinds of switches, and that's like BC Rich's. They had built-in, preamps and single coil splitting switches and out of phase switches and baritones and all this other stuff. So the other guitar he showed me was an Ibanez Musician, MC400. And that's what I ended up buying. And that kind of started off this whole fascination. The other guitar player in my band who came up with me, he ended up, later getting an Ibanez Iceman, and we just thought, wow, these are cool. I mean, I always dug like the Destroyer and the Rocket Roll Senior, the Flying V copy and the Destroyer Explorer copy.
Mm-hmm.
Those were always cool. The problem was that those things just sold way too quick. Like I could never get my hands on one. So that's kind of what I was jonesing for. And it kind of took me a long time before I finally got one. But that kind of started my whole love affair with Japanese guitars.
Nice.
And everything. Yeah.
Well, we're not going to necessarily talk about Japanese stuff today, but what we are going to discuss is, Tony, you're dying to tell. You squeaked out a noise out of your face.
We're going to discuss sleeper guitar bargains.
Yes. And that's less about it being the biggest bargain you can find, but just like, hey, you're probably gonna get it at a better price than you think because it is a sleeper. Right? Good. Okay, so that's gonna be really fun. And the big reason that we'll get into. I'll open up this story once we get into that section. But in the meantime, we have a couple of announcements. Number one, we recently had Mike Purcell from Monkey Riot Pedals, and he sent me something. He said, "Hey." What he said, blah, blah, blah. Hey, Todd, Jack's Guitarcheology in Lebanon, which is in Ohio, Nashville, which is about 20 minutes east of Nashville, is hosting a pop-up event with a bunch of locally based pedals and guitar builders. Attached is a flyer, blah, blah, blah. Don't know if you guys can mention it. Well, we are mentioning it. And I said, hey, I just want to get the word out on this. It's going to be featuring Hagtronics, Red River amplification, Kroll devices, Messiah guitars, Equitz guitars, who's been on the show a long time ago, Stringjoy, been on the show a long time ago, Hagtronics, hopefully on the show soon, and Red River, going to be on the show soon, Rose Electric Audio, Dismal Axe, and probably a whole bunch others that aren't even, in this, in the little flyer that I have right here. So, if you're in the Nashville area, November 3rd, get down to Lebanon and have a good old time with a bunch of gear, a little gear pop-up, a builder pop-up, if you were.
I love it.
Yes, and there's some great brands in there made by great people. So go meet those great people and make some friends, everybody.
Cool.
That's the announcement.
That was a great announcement.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Tony, we're going to get on to what's going on in our music world this week. Mm-hmm. You are going to share right now, and then we're going to check in with Chris.
Okay. Well, what I was originally going to talk about, apparently I'm not allowed to talk about. So I'm not going to talk about it.
Pick something
even
else.
Though I'd really like to talk about it.
I know. You'll get the chance to talk about it.
Okay. Well, hopefully. Well, in other happenings this week, I am finally finishing. This project has gone on way too long. This is my 62 Telecaster build.
I thought you were talking about how you're still trying to make that guitar out of your fiberglass prosthetic leg.
I thought you weren't going to mention that. That's very hurtful. And it's not fiberglass. No, both of my legs are natural parts.
Yes.
Anyhow, a while back we were talking about it. Our friends at Acorn Amps sent me some, I guess you would call them circuit board pick guards that they made.
Wow, that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. This has just gone on way too long.
Yes.
But it's almost done. It's
Yeah.
almost done. I just have to cut a nut and we'll be done.
Mm-hmm.
I had my buddy Pat from Coop Guitars make a body for me, and then I think it's an all parts neck, and I had him do some finish work on it, and it's kind of a cross between a Mary Kay and a butterscotch, but not too butterscotchy, so it's kind of a whitish color.
Wait, Mary Kay, like pink?
No.
Well, that's what Mary Kay is.
Well, not Mary. Chris,
Not the Cadillac.
Chris.
Right.
Chris, do you want?
I know. Well, the first when you're talking about colors,
Blondish beige color.
Yeah. Mary Kay. Also from the Fender line.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, not pink.
All right.
Jeez.
Not like the Cadillac.
Yes. Right. So it's a really cool color. I guess you could call it kind of a faded butterscotch.
A faded butterscotch.
Let's call it, or we can just call it white if you want.
It's like a warm white.
A warm white. Yes. Thank you.
Creamy.
Yes. Parchment, if you will.
Eggnog.
Anyhow.
Eggnog.
Eggnog. There we go. That's it. Eggnog. That's the color.
Ooh, I do love eggnog. It's almost eggnog season.
It is.
So anyhow, that's what I've been putting together. It's this off this when it's done, we'll post some photos. But it's the circuit board pick guard just looks really cool on it, and then I've got a set of Fralin pickups that I'm putting in it, and it feels good so far. It's a nice weight, and of course I'm always been a Telecaster fan. So as soon as I have it up and running, I will post some photos.
Excellent. That is fantastic. How about you, Chris?
Well, I have been on a bit of a pickup burn lately. A number of things. I got DiMarzio sent me over a little care package a while back, and that's some cool stuff. But I came across some Mighty Mite pickups, from the 70s.
Oh yeah.
Which, part of the Van Halen thing is Van Halen guys are always trying to figure out what the hell Eddie did and trying to duplicate this and that. And of course, Mighty Mite pickups were part of his sound early on in the club days. And I'm sure they probably made it onto some of the records. It's very hard to document that early stuff because he just either didn't remember or he didn't want to say. But I got a pair of super, super early Mighty Mites. They don't even have the name stamped on the back. And they don't, instead of having Phillips screws, they have flathead screws on the back. And they also have just single conductor wiring on them. So, and they're definitely Mighty Mites. They have all the hallmarks. They have the bobbin and everything like that. So anyways, I got those. And I got some other Mighty Mites. And then I was kind of like, well, what am I going to do with these pickups? And lo and behold, actually just yesterday, a good friend of mine, Donnie Ward of Vestige Guitars, just put up he's been making a bunch of Ibanez Destroyers, basically.
Oh, cool.
And we're going to do basically a version. I'm going to kind of do it kind of a different way, though, because I have a zebra coil for the neck, and then I have a double cream. And as opposed to going with the covered Super 70s like Ed had in his Destroyer, up till and through the recording of the first album.
Ed Van Halen, just so everybody knows.
Yeah, Eddie Van Halen. And but I want to do kind of like a hybrid, at least appearance-wise, of a Hamer Standard and the Ibanez Destroyer in white. So that's kind of what my new project is. So I can always pop the pickups out and put some chrome covered in if I want to go for the hardcore Eddie style look.
Yeah.
But I kind of prefer to do a little bit of my own thing. I think I'm going to probably put some Godzilla stickers on it or something too. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. What the hell?
Can you, for those that aren't familiar with the Mighty Mite pickups, tell us why they matter?
That's where, it's kind of, Seymour Duncan was making pickups before, just as like a independent guy, kind of roaming around. He did famously the pickups for the so-called Telegib that Jeff Beck used on Blow by Blow to record Since We've Ended as Lovers. And when Seymour came back to California, he got hired by Mighty Mite to build pickups. So that's really kind of the beginning of the Seymour Duncan company, even though it wasn't really Seymour Duncan. And they're interesting pickups because they were kind of like the West Coast equivalent of DiMarzio at the time, before Seymour started his own shop, which is probably about I think sometime in '78, I believe, is when he really officially opened up his custom shop. But yeah, they're interesting pickups. They have ceramic magnets. They have one called a Vintage, which is like a PAF wind. but it has a ceramic magnet instead, so it's brighter and has a little bit higher output. And then they also did, more of a high output version, which is about 14K ohm output. Again, it's kind of like the equivalent of a super distortion, essentially. A little bit different character, though. But they're interesting pickups. They're very cool. They have their own kind of thing going on. And I'm been dying to figure out how they fit into the Eddie Van Halen sound equation, in the early days.
Mm-hmm. And if I remember right, wasn't Mighty Mite one of the first kind of build it, do it DIY companies too, with necks and bodies?
Too. They were part of that whole thing because they were kind of everything is kind of, it gets very incestuous.
Them and Warmoth kind of.
Them and Warmoth and Boogie Bodies and everything like that,
right.
Kind of making parts and swapping stuff with each other. And DiMarzio ended up in the mix too, and Schecter and Charvel. But yeah, Boogie Bodies, not Boogie Bodies, Mighty Mite did actually have a catalog. They had like all these brass parts.
Right.
You could get bridges from them. You could get bodies and necks from them.
Wasn't Eddie's number the first version of the Frankenstein? The Super B, wasn't that a Mighty Mite build?
Oh well, there was the Bumblebee had the Bumblebee was a Charvel. Basically Ed had Mighty Mite pickups, so he got most of his stuff from Charvel. I don't want to get into the woods here.
Yeah, sure.
The whole argument about whether the body on the Frankenstein was actually made by Lynn Ellsworth of Boogie Bodies, or whether it was actually something that was part of a run that Wayne Charvel and Dave Schecter did for this job they had. And the facts seem to point more in favor of the Wayne Charvel-Schecter argument because of various, there's like a whole litany of features that match up with that run.
Yeah.
And they are not like a Boogie body at all.
Got it.
But yeah, no, Ed, it was part of his whole experimentation. He was getting parts from them, I think Seymour, people say like, oh, it was a rewound Seymour Duncan pickup on the first album on the Frankenstein, but I think that's not the case, actually. I think the Seymour stuff came later. And just you start to get into the weeds with this stuff, and you see, like, first of all, Ed wasn't that rich, so he didn't have that much different stuff. And you can see, like, where he took a certain part, and when he was learning to pot pickups, he melted, this DiMarzio PAF that he had, and it ended up, the Frankenstein or whatever a couple of years later, and blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't like the guy just had, a billion different pickups and a billion different necks and everything in the beginning.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I think that helps. That shed a lot of light. Yes. Which is something that you do very well, Chris, so we appreciate that.
What about you, Todd?
Well, I had the extreme privilege of going to a show with my daughter Jane this past weekend to go see one of my favorite bands, the Psychedelic Furs. And it was absolutely awesome. It was at this real small club. It was a pop-up kind of a show. It was like, it wasn't even listed on their tour.
Oh, wow.
And speaking of lo and behold, the guys come out on stage and I see Rich Good. Rich Good is a great player. I love his style, and he's chill, but he makes just fantastic textural sounds that I think I would view as a challenge, because you're not carrying it isn't about carrying a melody so much, because it's all the other instruments are doing such a good job of that. But tons of style. And right next to him is this dude, and I'm like looking at him like, wait a minute, that's Richard Fortus.
Wow.
And I completely forgot that he's been doing stints with them. I think mostly in Europe, if I'm not mistaken, but he was doing a Bode electric, a Bode double bass, like an electric double bass for some of their songs. And while the bow's in his hand, he's playing. He had a Trussart guitar, and he's one of the number one hired guns for a reason, obviously.
True.
And it was cool, because it was the kind of place that I could easily see a band that has been playing as long as they have. 78 or 79, I think they started. And playing all over the world, huge shows, top of the charts and everything. And they're at this place called Riverfront Live in Cincinnati, behind a restaurant.
Wow.
And they came out and played the first song, and the crowd, like it hit the back of my head. We were pretty close up front, and the roar of the audience was just so awesome, and you could see them all just instantly light up.
Wow, cool.
And they all looked at each other like, this is going to be a good show, and they put on
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, they were so good, and it was great.
That reminds me of one of my favorite gigs. Not exactly the same ilk, but it was Johnny Cash at the Fillmore in San Francisco, and this was in the mid '90s, early to mid '90s. But this was, Cash had just done the Rick Rubin record,
Right.
and so he was on the comeback and everything like that. But Cash at this point was still used to playing like the state fair circuit and everything, and of course the Fillmore was a rock and roll audience, and Cash had not been. He even actually mentions it in his biography, like this particular show. This is how much it meant to him, because the crowd went absolutely nuts. Like they do their first song and everything, and then he goes like, "Hello, my name is Johnny Cash."
Yeah, and
the place,
roof just must have lifted.
It was like a jet roar.
Yeah.
And it went on for like 3 minutes, and his eyes just kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like the longer the crowd went, the louder they got, the bigger Cash's eyes got.
Yeah, crazy.
Then like Cash is like, screw it, I'm doing the rock and roll show, and he started, he was an old man, but he was doing these moves and stuff. And at one point he had this mic down in the monitor, and it was feeding back and everything.
Wow.
And it was just really, really crazy. And even cooler was the fact that the Reverend Horton Heat opened up for the show. So people were just really rare to go after that. So it was a great, great night.
Wow.
But I know
Lucky you.
When the performer gets that type of response and they give it back, it's just like, that's a magical thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Rich Good, since I know you're listening out there, we'd love to talk to you at some point in time, because you're aces in my book. So, and tell your buddy, Rich Fortis, you just come on the show. Why not, right? Okay, so let's move on, because, well, before we do, I think it's worth saying that out of all those things, the biggest connective thread between all of the things that we've talked about so far is Tour Gear Designs patch cables.
What?
I know. For those who have been listening, this the whole time is like it must be clear. We were in the midst of it, so it probably was floating over our heads. But
yes,
Tour Gear Designs patch cables are the absolute number one thing that you can use for your pedal board to connect all your lovely pedals with.
I agree.
Yep, all kinds of lengths, all kinds of not all kinds. Two
that we know of.
Two that we know of. Orientations. So you got a C-shaped pedal or a U-shaped pedal. It's a C-shape. So that's like top jack to top jack, and then S. So top jack to side jack. Pretty cool, right?
That makes sense. S for side.
S for side. And they're super, super affordable. Go over to Tour Gear Designs, load up your cart. When you get that, go over to the, to checkout and put in the coupon, the guitar knobs, all one word. And Tony, what's going to happen?
You're going to save an extra 15%.
And then you're going to go back and get more, because you're like, I'm saving 15%.
I'm going to buy at least 25% more cables.
You know it. So we want to thank Tour Gear Designs for sponsoring our 4 on the Floor. Tony?
Let me get a little bit of this.
1, 2, 3.
4 on the floor.
All right, Chris Gill, guitar knowledge meister extraordinaire. What is your 4 on the Floor V4? Oh my gosh.
V4, I believe, yes.
Wow.
V4. So let's see what I do. I've done my favorite general pedals. I did my favorite Japanese pedals. I did my favorite, like, brand new on the market type of pedals. So in kind of the spirit of this show, I guess, I don't know, or kind of amalgamation of all of the above. This time I picked 4 pedals that are basically new boutique-ish reproductions of classic pedals that are really hard to get and super expensive, and, they just sometimes don't work the way you want them to, because they were, made for joint smoking hippies in the late 60s or early 70s or whatever, meant to be stomped on with, stack high heel boots or whatever.
Right.
So anyways, the first one was really tough because I got to have a flanger in there. And I have a ton of these flangers. The 80A flanger, from the 70s, late 70s. It's a classic. It's one of my favorite. I have every iteration of it. I have the 70s version. I have the 90s reissue. I have the 2000s era reissue. I have the pedalboard friendly, the PBA or whatever they call it, version of it. But having said that, they're gone. The supply, the chips that Dave Tarnowski had have all dried up. So, but there's a maker down in Australia. It's a she. I can't remember her name right now. I should have written that down. But the company's called Past Effects, and it's the 80, like 80A flanger. And it's a very accurate version of the 80A flanger. So you get those wonderfully luscious flanging tones, the strange metallic overtones. You get the automatic whammy effect that it does so well. It has the noise gate in it. It has the even odd harmonic switch and all that stuff. And it's a really great thing. It's not cheap, and she's running out of her chips as well. So this may be the end of an era.
Wow. So
I think if an 80A flanger sounds like something that floats your boat and you haven't gotten one yet, I would say definitely check out the Past Effects 80A.
Okay.
Very cool deal.
And from that 80A, you chose that above, so many other flangers. What is it about that you're just like, that's the thing, man?
I just, I love all flangers, great and small, for the most part. I mean, I like dramatic flanging effects. If you're going to have a flanger on there, it's got to grab your attention. And I think nothing really does like an 80A. It's the most dramatic, chewy, jet-like, and of course, just the variety of what you can get out of it. It was the first flanging pedal to get a very close approximation of true through zero flanging, the true flanging effect where it kind of goes into, nothingness and through the tunnel and all that. It's a great musical texture. It sounds great. My other ones would be like an Electric Mistress style, which, there's some that have been discontinued, and Past Effects does a great one too called the Elastic Mattress. So Past Effects is just doing great flangers of all the classics. So if you're in Flangerland, go there, check it out. They're a little expensive, but definitely worth it.
Okay, and that's Past FX, not
it's one word. Yes, FX, PAST-FX, all one word.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right.
Next thing would be the this is a little bit of an oldie, and it's probably been there may be better vibes out there now. There's been a lot of vibes out there, but the Dry Bell Vibe Machine is still. Once I got that, I kind of ended my search for a Univibe vibe pedal. I just think it works, and there may be ones out there that are better, but hey, the Dry Bell works for me. So, and it's made in some Eastern Bloc country, which I can't remember now. I want to say Czechoslovakia or something like that. But cool pedals. I mean, it's got texture. It's musical. It's everything you want out of a Vibe, but it's tiny. It's a little MXR Phase 90 size box.
It's got a lot of switches on it, or a lot of options, I should say.
It does have a lot of options, yeah. So, and it's a cool thing. It's like I said, I know there's people out there who rave about this or that other one, and this is better than the Dry Bell. I mean, you'll find with all this stuff that you'll find somebody's come along, right, and there'll be a new group of people waving a flag for them or whatever. But like I said, the Dry Bell for me just does it, and I just kind of gave up my search. It's like I'm not even gonna try,
Yeah. Now, this is the one that is chorus and vibe on it, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's like original Univibe was chorus and vibe too. So it was kind of vibrato chorus type of thing. So, and really it's the chorus kind of effect, at least for me, that I tend to prefer. And that's when you think of a Univibe is more that swirly. It's almost like a phase shifter, really.
Yeah.
A thick swirly phase shifter. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's two that have not been on the show and that everybody's frantically trying to look up. How about number 3?
Number 3 is the Heptode Virtuoso Phase Shifter.
Oh, man.
Which is
the Heptode.
Heptode, Heptode. It's a guy in France who makes these, and it's a very accurate reproduction, although, again, modernized, so it doesn't... It's a version of the Maestro PS a PS1A phase shifter, like the original phase shifter.
Okay.
Used to be like the size of a priest Bible, and had these rocker switches on it, and you have like three. This doesn't have that. It's smaller, and it has foot switches,
Right.
but it does have like basically three distinct speeds. You don't have a speed control, and it does ramp up in between speed settings, which is even cooler. So, but it has the character of an old Maestro, and it's God, no one wants to bring a Maestro out,
No.
in this day and age. So,
Well, and I was just reading a little bit of information on this, but sometimes it's good to know like what is that supposed to sound like, and so this was used by John Paul Jones,
Yes.
actually through his keyboard it sounds like,
Yes.
and Steve Howe from Yes, and Alex Lifeson from Rush, obviously, Ernie Isley, among many others.
Yes, that lady was, you'll read all this wrong information online about, Ernie Isley used a Roland Jet phaser. Well, no, he didn't, because I can't remember the exact year. I think he recorded that song in 71 or 72 or something like that. And the Jet phaser didn't come along till, I believe, 74 or 75. So it's like he couldn't have done that unless he had a time machine. So,
Right.
So it was a Electric Mistress. It was a Big Muff. It was a Big Muff fuzz pedal and a Maestro PS1A. Phase shifter that Ernie used for that great synthy little lead line there on "Who's That Lady?" or "That Lady" really is the official title of it, but that's the sound, and that classic John Paul Jones, he used it. What's that song? "In the Light" or something like that. I think I can't remember the name of it, but that really trippy electric piano thing with the phase going on it.
Right.
It's a great song. But yeah, it's a great texture. It's not the most versatile thing. You can't, adjust the speed, but do you need to?
Yeah. It
come
does
on.
the thing when you kick it.
Yeah. So
How about number 4?
Number 4 is another Past Effects pedal, which is their Chorus Ensemble Deluxe.
Oh, yes.
And this is a very dead-on accurate version of the Boss CE1 Chorus Ensemble, the original. But it sounds great. It has some nice modern convenience features that you don't have. You don't have the volume drop like you have. You don't have the level mismatch like you have on the original Boss. So it fixes all those problems. It has a little bit more leeway, a little bit more range, but it that elusive CE1 chorus ensemble texture. It's again, Past Effects is making great stuff. Again, she has some very limited resources of chips, so it's one of those things. If you're interested, you might want to jump on it sooner than later because there's only a finite amount of circuits left.
And we're looking on Reverb right now. There's they go from 216 to all the way to 360. Goodness sakes, that's quite a spread.
Yeah, and that's the spread is because there's a Panasonic MN 3007, I think, version, which is the much more common, newer integrated circuit, and then they have like a pair of these 512-bit, original style, new old stock 70s integrated circuits. And that's the ones that's really limited, going to be more expensive.
Right. Wowzers! All right, boy, we got a whole box of new stuff here.
New stuff.
Goodness sakes. Those are all very they really make an impact on your signal if you click any of that on.
Yeah, this is all, for the most part,
subtle in there.
This is all modulation effects. I love my modulations effects. So,
yes, clearly.
Yeah. So talk about the textural stuff,
Yes. Well, speaking of textural stuff, let's talk about some guitar stuff.
Yes.
That was a double, no-ended, not connected segue. So I got a lovely note from our good friend of the show, Bob Crouch, who sent me this thing, and he showed me this picture of this gorgeous guitar, absolutely beautiful. That's like I think it's about a tobacco burst, yeah, Tony?
Tobacco burst, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would call it that.
And he says, It's a 1975 Japanese Greco Les Paul. He said he just showed up at my house. I was helped through the process by Chris Gill after he was on the show, and he was cool to answer a few questions I had. These guitars are dynamite and less than half what you'd pay for the better-known brand and model from the same time period. Highly recommended. He says, yes, and this guitar and I both get to turn 50 together next year. That's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Love it.
Well, that got me to thinking. Self, that would make a pretty good topic for a show. Like,
You often talk to yourself, don't you?
I do, because
No one else will listen.
No one else listens, yeah. And so I said, well, I know one person that would be great at that, and that's Chris. And then I just drug Tony along.
Thanks.
No,
for
Tony
noticing.
also between these two guys. It's like I'm bookended by like encyclopedias. So I'm happy to be in this
Can I
knowledge
be
sandwich.
Britannica?
Yes. You look like the Britannica. Hey, just kidding.
I'll be the World Book.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a
So-
good one too.
What I found to be interesting about this is that the sleeper quote unquote guitar, it means many different things to many different people, and it is you enter a realm of very high subjectivity when you do that, meaning you're not thinking like necessarily are rationalizing a purchase as much as saying, I want to get something that has certain criteria that you have. The reason I bring up the rationalizing thing is that I was actually in a conversation with somebody the other day, and they're like, hey, how do you what guitars do you have, blah, blah, blah. And as we started talking, it was clear, it was like, there are a lot of people who buy guitars based on the idea that, well, I'm going to buy something. I only have so much money. I don't want to spend it on something that I may have to sell. And if I do have to sell it, I want to make sure I get my money back or more if possible. And it becomes almost like a transactional purchase instead of an emotional purchase, which I mean, look, guitars are emotional things. We get attached to them. We make things, we make our own sounds out of them that are uniquely ours more often than not. And the idea of buying a guitar and not making it be yours, right? Whether that's, I'm going to put stickers on it, I'm going to put a new pickguard on it, I'm going to change the color, I'm going to do whatever, I'm going to spray paint all over it, and not worrying about, well, yeah, but if I buy this, I can turn around in 2 years and get it's like, just be in the now and love what you got, right? And that opens up the door for like stranger guitars that maybe you don't think you can get the full resale on. I don't know. Anyways, it was just a conversation that kind of dovetailed into where we're at with this one. So I just wanted to share that. Don't let the resale value guide your purchase, people. Unless that is your absolute goal and you really don't care.
Don't fear.
And that's fine too.
Don't fear the resale value.
Yes. Have fun with what you got and make it yours. Okay, so with that, I turned to Chris and I turned to Tony and I said, guys, let's talk about what are sleeper guitars. What are some brands that we can start at the top with and trickle down into some, like, maybe of your, favorite models or good buys or like, ones you just can't, if you see it, don't pass up on it.
Cool.
As well as what to look out for, what to do, what not to do. Okay?
Yeah.
Chris, since I hit you up for this, what is your interpretation of a sleeper guitar?
Well, it's definitely, like you said, I think it's something that it's not so precious that, I mean, first of all, it's got to be just a great guitar. It's got to be something that you love to play. It sounds good, looks cool. but also something that's not so precious that you don't worry about nicking it up, or if you do want to repaint it, or if you do want to put stickers on it, or you do want to do any customization to it, you want to swap the pickups out, you want to do some upgrades or something like that, or who knows what. And I think, a lot of that territory is like the less you spend, the more likely you're not going to regret doing something as much. Now, having said that, some of these guitars that I'm going to talk about are collectible now in their own right. So some of them you aren't going to want to touch. Some people will make the sign of the cross of you if you've changed a screw on it or whatever. But I guess that happens with everything. There's collectors of everything nowadays. But I think part of it too is just the vibe. I mean, it's just, there's something about, I found all these Japanese copy guitars are very vibey.
Yes.
And
sleepers tend to have a little bit more vibe, I think.
Yeah.
I think so.
There's just the little extra funk, in it and stuff. And it's sometimes it's like, if I'm going to spend all this money on this kind of aspirational guitar, you don't want to get it dirty and nick it up and whatever, and you feel funny, if you've spent thousands of dollars on something, I think it kind of restrains you a little bit. One of the best examples I can think of, and kind of part of the reason why I got off onto the whole Japanese Les Paul kick, was Billy Gibbons, because we all know about Pearly Gates, the 59 Les Paul standard burst that the legendary Billy Gibbons ZZ Top guitar. Right. But a good chunk of the 80s and 90s, he was out there with the Tokai Love Rock guitar. And I'd gone to see them I met up with Billy at Radio City Music Hall, and it's like, this is what I'm playing, Tokai Love Rock, It's like, wow, I got to get me one of them Love Rocks. Right. So that started me off. Then somebody I worked with.
Wait a minute. I'm just going to be stupid. Just let me be stupid for a second. You said, he said, you got to get one of these. And you said, how?
Yes, exactly.
Talk about low-lying
now I'm swinging with Tony in the lowlands.
Ooh, look at that rotten apple over there. It's delicious.
Okay, go ahead.
So anyways, I also worked with Tom Beaujour at Guitar World at the time, and he had a Greco, the Les Paul. And I was just like, okay, this is cool. And as it just so happened, I got an assignment going to Japan to cover Mr. Big on tour over in Japan. Big in Japan. Low-hanging fruit. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyways, I go over there, and I talked before in the Japanese Pedals 101 thing about the Big Sonic Expandora guys. Well, I knew them. They took me around to various guitar shops because I like, what do you want to do? And it's like, I want a Greco Les Paul. So take me out to the store that's got them, and they took me out to a couple places, and they took me to this one store, and they had about 5 of them. And I picked out the one that I just bonded with. And I think it cost me $450 at the time. This Greco was everything. It was like my 65 SG. It felt like as Gibson as my 65 SG. Right. Whereas new Gibsons didn't feel like my 65 SG or, 57 Junior that I had gotten somewhere along the line too. It didn't have that. And the Greco did. And I think it's amazing because I've come to find out a lot, anyone who's followed the vintage guitar market knows about like how during the late 70s and especially during the 80s, when the Japanese economy was booming, Japanese were buying up a lot of our vintage guitars. And I know why a lot of them were doing a lot. I mean, a lot of them were collecting and speculating and so on. But also there was like the president of ESP who built up an amazing collection. And there's a museum in Shibuya, Tokyo, Japan, the ESP museum. And half of it's like ESP custom guitars. And the other half's a good chunk of his vintage guitar collection. And he bought those guitars and, for ESP for them to copy. So they went over every single detail, when you would get these copies and they would be more accurate than the current Gibson was as far as the vintage spec.
And I think that's where both Gibson and Fender and others, Martin guitars at the time, they really dropped the ball because they let things go and really did open up the Japanese market for replica copies, lawsuit guitars, whatever you want to call them. And truth be told, many of those Japanese guitars from the era probably surpassed what Gibson, Fender, Martin were able to do.
It's very true, and that's I think a big player in all of this. I mentioned ESP, and that's pretty much until the early '80s, ESP was just a player in the Japanese market. So they didn't really start to focus on coming over to the U.S. till about '82 or '83 or so. But of course, we had the famous Ibanez lawsuit guitars. I think those are the ones that made the biggest impact. Mm-hmm. Because they had better distribution in the United States and everything. And those guitars were made by a company called Fujigen-Gaki. Mm-hmm. And Fujigen didn't only make stuff for Ibanez, but they also made the Greco brand, which is basically about the same thing, but marketed and sold in Japan. They made these great copies of Fender stuff, and this is when Fender, when CBS decided to sell them, and then Fender was looking at these Japanese copies coming over, and players were raving about these great Japanese Fender copies, and they were very smart. Bill Schultz and the other guys, the investors who bought Fender back from CBS, they hired Fujigen to make guitars for them, for the resurrection of the Fender brand in the early 80s.
Yep.
So, and a little known, it's actually because, Fujigen also made a lot of other stuff through the years. They've made several models for G&L. They made the Music Man, more recently the EX series, kind of the budget versions of Music Man models. They made a lot of Epiphone guitars for a while, like during the 80s and early 90s. There was also something in Japan called Orville by Gibson, which was the sanctioned Gibson copies of Gibsons. They made guitars for Ibanez. They made them for Dean, Spectre. I mean, it goes on and on.
Wow.
Like Fujigen really, because it was a kind of it was a company, but they also were kind of like this jobber. They made guitars for various other sources. So. A lot of these guitars that you can find now, like these Music Man EX series, they're Grecos, they're Ibanez, basically they're Fujigen. So they've got some of that DNA and that know-how in there and that craftsmanship.
Now, when did I think everyone, with maybe some exceptions, with the very earliest Japanese models, when some of these companies shifted over to Korean production? Was there, in my opinion, there seemed to be somewhat of a noticeable difference in terms of quality, but by maybe today's standards compared to some of the Chinese and Indonesian things that are out there, maybe the Korean ones were maybe a little bit better.
I think that's the case, and I think it's also just a bit of progress and training and so on, because I think the thing is, like, you have these other companies, a lot of these guitar companies in Japan, and even to this day, there's still just a great education. ESP, for example, has a guitar building school, and they don't care if you go to work for ESP or any number of these other companies. It's just about keeping the Japanese guitar industry thriving. Mm-hmm. So I think you got to go over there, and there's a little bit of a learning period. It's like, okay, we've got to train these people. We've got to set up these lines. We've got to do that. So there's a little bit of this break-in period. And that's where I think you see the transition. But over time, of course, the Korean stuff has come up in quality.
Yep.
Now, Korean stuff is basically like what, Japanese stuff was like during the 80s and 90s, So having said that, with so much CNC stuff, it's just shocking the quality of a cheap guitar these days.
Yeah. Well, when we had Kenny from Reverend Guitars on, and most of it, all of his import line is made at a factory in Korea, and surprisingly, the stuff there is not CNC. It's all done kind of like if you walked into a factory in the 1950s or 60s, a Fender factory or the Gibson factory.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so there's still a high level of craftsmanship, and I think I would say that if you wanted something that, if you like the concept of things being made by hand, they're still doing it in certain
That's
areas.
great.
Now,
I have to say, just as a little sidebar, like I just was blown away. I just recently reviewed a Squire Starcaster. I think it was Artist Deluxe or something like that. I can't remember the exact name, but it's the one with the 70s style headstock as opposed to the kind of sweeping wave standard Starcaster one. But it was a great guitar, and it's $349.
it's just frightening. I mean, that they're able to put something together. I mean, but after markups and everything else, I mean, maybe the factory gets $80 for the guitar.
Yeah, it's just shocking. Like, I mean, that's, you can barely get a pedal or some pickups for that much anymore.
Yeah.
And yet here it's a semi-hollow guitar.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. And it sounds great and it plays great. I was just blown away.
Awesome. So you mentioned a couple of big names. You got Greco and Ibanez. I think the Ibanez lawsuit stuff is relatively maybe even more known than some of the Greco stuff. Tony, you've got a handful of things. So again, we're talking about like where do we start at the top and then trickle down?
I think what we were talking about are kind of what most people would consider the upper tier of these kinds of guitars. And I mean, I would put like Tokai into that category. Bernie, is that also by Greco?
Bernie is that's actually because there's a couple other companies. This is the thing. A lot of these guitars, it gets incestuous again because there's basically a lot of these big companies. Now, Tokai was its own standalone company for the most part. So Tokai basically is Tokai. You have also this company called Matsumoto, and they were famous initially, like the 70s, like when they stopped making Epiphones by Gibson, in Kalamazoo. Matsumoto started making them in Japan. And Matsumoto also made guitars for the Aria brand. They also made some Greco and Ibanez stuff very, very early on, before probably the very early 70s. And they made Washburn, Univox, Electra. And then you also have a company called Dynagaki, and they made Bernie, actually, Fernandez and Bernie.
Okay.
Again, they also did some Fender Japan work. They actually took over after Fujigen. Dynagaki was what Fender Japan came before. Now Fender Japan is its own standalone thing. It's Fender. So, but they did some Greco stuff. So again, there's a lot of crossover. And like Tokai, I'd say, is like one of the more standalone companies. And then you have ESP, which has ESP, but then they also have brands that are more common in Japan, like Navigator, which is a very, very high-end copy.
And how about is Edwards part of ESP as well?
Edwards is part of ESP, and then they have a very low budget but super cool brand, Japanese only budget brand called Grassroots.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I think I've seen some of those. I mean, I haven't had in my hands, but I've seen them on various auction sites and such.
So Tony, you dropped a handful of names on us, and then we were kind of sped by them. So Bernie, why did you put Bernie on this list?
Those I've played a couple of those guitars, and honestly,
looks like it's mostly
Gibson style replicas, if you want to call it that. But I think they're very well made. The one thing I did want to go back,
we're kind of all floating around in the like late 70s.
This is late 70s into the early 80s possibly.
Okay.
And the one thing I think we forgot to mention is some of the very earliest, whether they're Ibanez or some of the others, for instance, a Les Paul might actually not be a solid top guitar.
Yeah.
Many of them had it's kind of an arched shaped top, and with a solid back body.
Yeah.
But there's not solid wood underneath.
So it's like a cap.
Like a what?
A cap.
Well, like a cap, but hollow.
Right.
A hollow cap, if you will. And, truth be told, there is a certain sound to those instruments too. And I think maybe because they are technically semi-hollows, but and a lot of the early ones also had bolt-on necks, which again makes a little bit of a difference in terms of the tonality of the instrument. So so those are
a lot of the Grecos that were mentioned, except for it sounds like, and Chris, please jump in, but the Grecos, mostly the LP style guitars. The ones that are in the 70s were set necks. Sorry, and then a little bit later you get it. A lot of them turn into bolt-ons.
Well,
Actually, not quite. Yeah, it's
okay.
More common, actually. A lot of the Japanese stuff initially, especially the early 70s, were more likely to have bolt-on necks.
Okay.
The set necks started to come along. Somewhere along the point, you got like a bolt and set, kind of a weird thing. Like there's actually the first Greco Les Paul that I bought was what's called a Rock Spirits, and they kind of vary quite a bit. The one I got's more like the high end Rock Spirits, and it's 50s all the way. It's got the long neck tenon. It's got great pickups on it. It's got a true set neck on it. It's got nickel parts on it. I think the only thing, and it just doesn't mean jack to me, but it has a laminated flame on top of the slab of maples.
That's right.
But it's still, it works like a flame. You turn it and you get that 3D kind of changing effect and everything like that. And hey, it still sounds good. It's still maple underneath that. So
yeah. And
big deal.
Let's talk about price really quick before we get into a whole bunch of other brands. I mean, for most of the guitars that we're talking about, you're right around like $800 to $1,500.
Yeah.
600
Yeah.
to $1,500.
Yeah.
On the $1,500 on the very high end of things.
Pretty much, yeah, and you can go higher. That's the thing. This is where you get more into the more of the collector thing. Like you have certain varieties of the Tokai Love Rock. You have certain super real Grecos, and like I trying to remember the numbers. Like I think it was like the EGF 1200 or whatever, where they have what they call like the super dry pickups in them. And that sort of thing. But yeah, generally, I mean, you're getting down to splitting hairs sometimes, and it's like you can get a damn good guitar for $800 to $1,000, which is just incredible. And again, it's like, do you really want to spend a couple $100 extra bucks to have an actual, solid piece of flame maple or, a laminated flame maple, aesthetic top on it?
Right.
I was going to say about this, the Rock Spirits, you have to watch out with the Rock Spirits because some are set neck like I have with the long neck tenon. Other ones, this is where you want to, before you buy something, you want to look at the photos because the ones that have a bolt-on neck, you can only see a single screw on the back. There's not a neck plate, but there is like a single hole where a screw goes in. So it's kind of a combination, it's glued, but it's also bolted on. So, and those ones aren't as desirable. I mean, for obvious reasons, because like the one I have is basically it's a late 50s burst.
Right.
So
interesting. Okay.
But there's a lot of brands I would recommend. There's a website with a ton of catalogs. It's really hard to decipher because no one's really done a great detailed history of this stuff. You'll see a lot of misinformation out there. You'll see a lot of speculation, even from sellers. Like a lot of people don't know what years these things are. It could be an 85. It could be a 95. Sometimes it's not so cut and dry, but there's a website called vintagejapanguitars.com, and they have a bunch of catalog PDFs there from various companies. And it's a very helpful resource to go through. And it's just, if you're kind of thinking like I'm vibing on this, and maybe I want to look for a specific model or something, well, you can go through there and you'll see a lot of this stuff. It's not comprehensive. I couldn't find information, any literature about the Greco Rock Spirits line whatsoever on this website. It must be out there somewhere, and I have to do a little bit more digging. But that particular website's really good because they have various advertisements, brochures, and catalogs from a ton of different Japanese guitar brands.
Gotcha. I think also it's worth mentioning when you're at guitar shows, like sometimes these are the ones that are, you sitting behind a lot of the other bigger names.
Oh yeah.
And, take a minute. Don't scoff at it. It might be the best guitar you've ever played.
That's right.
Yeah,
and they're more negotiable.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of
the
times.
sellers will be for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to mention about that Grassroots brand. I just bought a Grassroots when I was in Japan last summer. I bought a Japanese Grassroots mini Les Paul.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like $300 or something I spent for it. I can't remember. It was cheap, but the neck is great on it, and it feels like a Gibson. It's tiny, it's smaller, but it's vibey. It's Gibson-y. And it's inexpensive, and the Grassroots ones are the same, and they're just they're bigger.
We're also, we're busy perusing reverb and whatnot on these, and a lot of these actually have the cases with them, which is extra cool. Now, Tony, you got on to Bernie and a couple others. Can you replay some of that?
Well, I think we talked a little bit already about Fernandez.
Sure.
And obviously Tokai.
I had a Fernandez Telecaster at one point.
Well, good. It was probably a good guitar.
It was. I traded it for something. I can't remember what it was. But anyways, go on.
Probably something not as good.
Oh, no. I know what it is. I sold it to a guy that I worked with for $350, which is what I paid for a, now looking on it, maybe nefarious in nature, Sheraton 2.
Okay.
Yes, that a guy stuck the guitar out of a door and put out his palm, and I took the guitar and he took the money and
wow.
I don't know. Anyways, I was younger. Whatever.
You must have been scarier back then.
Anyways,
so we talked to kind of like 70s and 80s kinds of things going on. And by the time the 90s roll around, I mean, there's, I think at that time, even into the 80s, I guess Fender started reintroducing their Squire line, or introduced their Squire line. And some of those very earliest Squire models are just incredible.
So like early 80s.
Yeah, probably 82, 83, maybe 84. I can't remember now. And there are some, I mean, there's actually George Harrison, of all people, played a Dakota Red Squire Stratocaster.
Yep.
I mean, so it's like there's these little things, and especially the Japanese lines of the Squires are highly desirable, and they still are, and they're incredibly good. The one thing that I've noticed on the Japanese Squire line is the necks tend to be a little bit thinner. So if you like a real beefy neck, these aren't going to work real well for you. But even for a period of time I probably purchased 8 or 10 Squire bullets, and I would harvest the necks to make Telecasters out of, because it's basically a Telecaster neck.
And for those that don't know what a bullet is, explain that.
Originally there was the Fender bullet, which was about the lowest end economy line that Fender put out. It had some odd types of things, like the bridge plate being made part of the metal pickguard that was on the guitar.
Right, but wasn't the bullet name came from the truss rod cover, wasn't it?
Well, the truss rod adjuster.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where the series came from, but most of the, especially the Japanese ones, had truss rod at the heel. So that by that time, the 70s bullet truss rod adjuster at the headstock was non-existent. For that line. But there were some great bargains at the time, and this would have been in the 90s when I was buying a bunch of these things, and then I'd sell off the bodies and things, keep the neck, make Telecasters out of the Squire necks, and those are some really great guitars.
What would we be looking at price-wise for something like that right around now?
Today?
Yeah.
A lot more than I was paying. Back in the 90s, I think most of my Squires were under $100.
Sure.
But, I did actually keep I kept a Squire jazz bass, Japanese jazz bass, that it's one of the few guitars that I've actually not changed anything on, because it was absolutely perfect. And I think that one I shelled out a whole $125 for back then.
Wow, I'm looking at a really cool Squire Bullet 80s white base with a very old looking sparkle guard on it, and all of the hardware is oxidized. That's really cool.
And what's the price?
$375.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
So there are still some decent bargains to be had out there. I mean, I think word's gotten out that if it's made in Japan or crafted in Japan, it's going to be really, really good, and that's true to some extent, most of the time. But there's some dogs out there too.
Yeah. I will say one of my favorite, there's a lot of attention to Ibanez and, like especially the more extreme, like the Explorer and Flying V copies and stuff are going for elevated prices now. And now people pay, especially the Destroyer because of the Van Halen connection, and hence the Greco, which is exactly the same thing, just a different name. Those have gone up in price too. But there are other brands that you can look at that are very similar, like Aria, for example. And usually you have to look over at Japanese sellers for this. They didn't make it over to the United States as much, but Aria made a bunch of really cool Destroyer or Explorer type of models that are really well made. I actually got an Aria BC Rich Mockingbird copy that's better than that damn BC Rich I was going to buy as a kid. It's really well made, and it was like $1,000. And that was just a few years ago that I got that. And it has DiMarzio Super Distortion, or actually the dual sound humbuckers in it. 1980 that was made, and there's just, if you look at some of these other brands, they're actually sometimes it's there will be a tendency for people to focus on like Tokai, Greco, Ibanez, and but it's also worth looking up some of these other brands as well, because a lot of times, again, they were made in the same factory or a similar factory to similar standards, and they're just as good, just a different name on the headstock.
No, that's a really good point. I think I think the major manufacturers in the States finally realized by the 80s and into the 90s. You had Squire with Fender. You also had Epiphone with Gibson. And a lot of the early Epiphone lines, and I would say some of the latest releases that Epiphone's put out are really surprisingly good and not expensive at all. I mean, there are some really good bargains to be had out there, and a lot of the
casinos.
Oh yeah, the casinos. I mean, there was we were just talking an episode or two ago about the Epiphone Elitist series, which was made in Japan, and I've owned a number of those over the years, and those are great guitars.
Excellent.
I do want to mention one other thing, and that's a Tokai model that I love. It's a very quirky model. It's the Talbot. Which is aluminum body. Man, you can get those, especially in Japan. You can get them super dirt cheap. I got mine for $400 a couple of years ago.
Oh my God!
A little beaten up, but they're funky. You want to talk about a guitar to make your own? It's got this aluminum body. It's got its own sound. That's why I bought it, because it was in my favorite shop in all of Tokyo called TC Gaki. And they have all kinds of cool and funky Japanese guitars mostly, and a lot of American stuff too. But I was between that and a Greco Mirage, which is basically it's an Ibanez Iceman. And I picked up the Mirage and I played. I said, I've got another 10 dozen guitars with dual humbuckers and sounds similar to this. I picked up the Talbot and it's like, wow, this has got a tone. It's got personality. It's got it going on. So it was cheaper and I bought it. And I love them.
Yeah, it looks like they make a translucent. Well, they're all translucent because it's a lucite, like a lucite blue one. Oh my God, that's got to be heavy.
But they've got a lucite one. Actually, I think they're hollow though. So that's the other thing is that they're basically hollow inside. So you think it's going to be this big heavy thing. I mean, the aluminum ones are still a little bit heavy, but about a Les Paul weight. About 9 or 10 pounds.
Not bad. So. What else is on the list?
Well, I thought we would try to move along to some of the stuff that's more readily available. Like some of my favorites were the D'Armands that were a division of Guild at the time,
Yep.
And I mean, they were blowing them out through Sam Ash and Musician's
These
Friend.
are the recent ones.
Yeah, well, no, this has been they originally, I think they broke around the late 90s into the early 2000s. And these were made, and they weren't supposed to make it to the United States, but they were mostly Korean-made models that were meant to be sold in Europe primarily, but secondarily probably in the Asian market too. And somehow either they weren't selling as well as they should, but they were just blowing these things out through, like I said, Sam Ash and Musician's Friend and
ProStar
probably.
more recently.
I mean, these were great guitars. I wished I would have kept at least one or two of the ones that I had, but I mean, if you're a fan of Guild guitars, you know, they made some really hollow body versions. They made some solid body versions, and I mean, oh yeah, the Champagne Sparkle.
Goodness
the I had one of those.
That is cool. That is amazing. Tony just saw my mouth wide open. I'm looking at a Diarmond M75T Champagne Sparkle, and it's just that's like, you know, it's very Billy Zoomy.
Oh yeah, they're more stunning in person, I would say.
I'm sure.
But again, these were things, you know, and now people recognize what a value they were. They're going for significantly more money than they were selling as part of their blowout. But I think I probably picked up 5 or 6 of them at the time, and then sold them over the years, and I don't know.
Yeah,
you know,
nice one, Tony.
Way
to go.
If only we would keep the stuff that we thought.
Well, and let's look at this one really quick. I mean, this has got a
Diarmond Bigsby
with the D on it, and also at the neck, the truss rod cover actually says Guild on it.
Yeah.
So it says Diarmond on
By
the top
Guild.
in pearl, and then Guild at the bottom.
This one's missing the pick guard, but
then these pickups, Tony, tell us about those.
Those were so what did they call them? They called them the 2K Diarmond 2K pickups, and they're supposed to look kind of like some of the early Diarmond, true Diarmond made in USA pickups, things that you'd find on Gretches. Of course, on Guilds in the day, they're not made the same. They don't have the adjustable pole pieces, but they're actually a decent sounding pickup. They also made some that had true humbuckers and different things like that too. So
yeah,
there were some really cool. I mean, in
the later ones that like the one that you got most recently, I think you got that on ProStar or maybe Sam Ash. That was a little bit stinky though, wasn't it?
Which one?
The one with the little squirrely Q, like pick guard thingamabob.
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's kind of poopy.
Well, that's D'Angelico.
That's what it was. Sorry, my bad.
The other D.
Yeah.
This is a D apostrophe.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's okay. There are some inexpensive things that, you know, actually turn out to be pretty decent.
But you like weird guitars.
I do like weird things.
Yes.
And that kind of leads me, you know, to some of the newer things that I think are really good bargains out there are the Harley Bentons.
Yeah.
I actually bought a Jazzmaster style Harley Benton because I wanted to see what everybody was raving about.
Yep.
And
I almost pulled the trigger on a Junior.
It's sort of a Junior.
Well, okay, their version of a Junior. Yeah.
But I find that, you know, those, even with shipping from Germany, because there's only one outlet that you can buy them through, for under $250, you can get a pretty decent guitar. I mean, I'm shocked at how good some of these things are. Mm-hmm. Another one that comes to mind would be Sire. Sire has been releasing some really cool, especially Larry Carlton has endorsed a number of their models. And everyone that I've picked up, I'm just surprised at how good they actually play and sound. So, I don't know. Chris, do you have any more recent types of releases that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that I'm just looking through, stuff that's rung my bell. I mean, like the Dan Electro stuff can be fun. You know, that's always kind of they're often better than you think they would be. And again, a lot of personality. I mean, I haven't kept up with what they've been doing lately, but I got a lot of fun stuff from them over the years. The Dean 79 series were always kind of cool. I got a really cool flying V from them. Like, I think it was like $400, like the 79 series V.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a cool thing. I don't know if they're making them anymore or what they run. Let's see. There would be a couple Framus models were actually, there was like the Framus Diablo. They have like some of their more import, not the stuff that's made in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
They have some stuff that's pretty decent value and, good pickups on them and very well built.
Yeah.
Very solidly built. Let's see who else. Oh, Gretsch, the Gretsch, electromatic line, the cheaper Gretches. I mean, I have recommended those to so many people starting off that want to get something cool, and something that's, more motivating, to play.
Yeah.
And of course they have a little bit shorter scale too, which helps out the people that are beginning. But I love those. They're great little vibey instruments.
Yeah. I mean, not everyone can go out and buy a 6120 but you can certainly afford, was it the 5600 series or whatever it is?
Yeah. Like the 5100, I think, or something like that.
5222 series.
Yep.
Yeah. And, of course their duo jet style, guitars are really cool too.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're right. Those.
I mean, look, this is a G5232T. It's a double jet with a flipping Bigsby on it.
Yeah.
For less than $500. That's $450
Yeah, they're great guitars
with a case.
Buy it.
They sound great.
Buy it right now. Buy it now. Click on buy it now.
It's sparkle blue. It's like midnight sapphire. I mean, that in black. It's in a heartbeat or silver sparkle or something like that.
Yeah,
sure.
And you can probably find a silver
I probably
sparkle
could.
one.
Maybe I'll look for it. Okay, so those are some brands. We've thrown a couple out there. Any other lurking? I had mentioned to Tony Godin is another one that I don't think gets its due. I had a what was it, the Kingpin, Fifth Avenue Kingpin, Fifth, something like that.
Yeah,
that was a great guitar, and I looked into how's this made, and the coolest thing about it that I thought, aside the neck on that, was unbelievable. A guy traded me. That's what I traded for the Gibson Explorer, the '82 Explorer.
Oh, yeah.
Believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah. That's what I said, and I put it in my car and drove as fast as I could. But what I liked about it also is I looked into the company, and I don't know if this applies to all of their guitars. But I also got the acoustic, the full size acoustic. I think
Seagull?
it's called the Roadhouse. No, not the Seagull. And they basically have created their own forest. They only pull wood out of this forest and replant, and so it's all local Canadian wood that they keep replenishing. So they're not scorching the earth trying to get all this wood, and that's kind of cool. You're buying a Canadian guitar built in Canada, made out of Canadian wood.
And a lot of times the Canadian Forestry Service provides Godin with logs and things, because as they're clearing out areas and what have you, fallen trees and such.
Hello, got a log.
Sorry about your tree.
Yeah, here it is, though. It's a real good one, eh?
Now we've upset all of our Canadian listeners.
Yes. All right, that sealed the deal right there. If you know, you know. All right. So that was one that came to mind for me. Yes.
Take off.
Oh, take off.
I thought you said, "Hey, Todd."
Yeah, I did too. So, anyways, we've mentioned a lot of known brands and stuff, and sometimes I think it's also worth saying, even if it's like some kind of goofy jalopy kind of guitar, a parts caster, loads of parts casters out there that are fantastic.
Yeah.
So, don't judge a book by its cover. Pick it up, play it. If you dig it, get it.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that may look a little weird, but if you like the way they feel and like the way they sound,
Yeah.
and if you don't like the way they sound, you can always change out pickups and do all sorts of things to
Or smash it.
or smash it.
Okay, so we kind of hit the top level there. Obviously, we could go on and on and on and on and on and drill down into all the very specific models. But
Right.
in looking for some of these, and even if you're at the shows and whatnot, what are some things that you might want to be mindful of, be wary of? Because there, Tony, you and I have been at a lot of shows, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Actually, there was the Greco double.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. Double cutaway.
Yes.
Like the walnut that was the pointy.
Oh, yeah.
You look it up, everybody. You'll see it. Anyways, I saw a red one of those, and I was like, oh, man, that is really cool. And you immediately said, well, blank, 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 and blank, blank, all of the problems that thing probably has. And I went over and picked it up and was like, you were right on almost every single one of those things. So pitfalls abound. How do we avoid those? What do we look for? And what's worth getting it, even if it is a pitfall?
Is that directed to me?
That's directed to whomever wants to field it.
There are plenty of pitfalls. Well, I think Chris would agree with that too.
Yeah, I'd say one thing that I enjoy about buying stuff from Japan is that they are very conscientious about condition, and they will. There's a caveat that I will have to get to a little bit later. But first of all, if you're buying directly from a dealer, like, again, I keep on mentioning my buddies TC Gaki, but they just do such a great job. They will show you highly detailed close-up photos of every little nick and scratch and everything on there, answer your questions about, because you do want to make sure, especially with hardware, have the pots been changed? Have they been upgraded? Have they been downgraded? Are the pickups original, or what are the pickups that are in there? That kind of thing, because there's certain things you might want to look for. And I mean, there's some of these guitars might just want to get just for the pickups, because they may have old vintage DiMarzios or Seymour Duncans or those great Maxon Super 70 U2000 type of pickups that are very desirable and go for a lot of money in the aftermarket. But I find that they're great to deal with. You ask a question, as long as you can get someone who can communicate in English. The one challenge you will find with a lot of dealers in Japan is they don't want to deal. They don't want to send stuff to the United States. And that's where you'll have a lot of what you see especially on eBay. Well, you'll have a lot of these third-party sellers, these go-betweens, and you may see the same guitar listed by 3 different people for 3 different prices.
Right.
Got it.
And that's where you want to be a little bit careful, because A, those people don't have the guitar in hand, so they can't really tell you what the condition is. And B, you may arrange to buy something, and then they go to buy it and it's already been sold. And something to look out for is one way to easily tell. I mean, one way is if they're a dealer, you look up the name of their shop. And if they don't have a shop, then they're not a dealer, But also if the backgrounds are all different behind, like some of them are like in a definite storage situation with a bunch of guitars behind them. Others are like a carpet or whatever. If their backgrounds vary a whole lot, then more likely than not, they're a third-party seller.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily bad. There are a couple ways you can go with that one, because if you're buying through eBay, you do have a lot of protection. Mm-hmm. So you have that. You have the whatever the PayPal protection, blah blah blah, whatever that you have. You can also go through a proxy service. There's any number of them in Japan: Zen Market Buy, Irakuma, Nyokyo, Tenso. They all have their pluses and minuses. You're going to pay a bit extra. You're going to pay extra on the exchange rate, because they're going to usually give you a dollar amount. They won't let you buy it in yen. So they're going to, tack on a few extra whatever in their favor.
Sure.
They're going to charge you a handling fee. They're going to charge you for shipping, which again is going to be, you're going to tack a little bit of extra money on it. So you can end up paying a little bit more. And sometimes you'll have to pay Japanese tax and shipping within Japan too. So you're basically paying 2 shipping charges and tax that you would otherwise avoid if you were dealing just directly with a dealer. But that's sometimes it's if you find something over there and you want it and you can't get it otherwise, these people will be a good go-between.
Sure.
There's actually one shop that's funny because this, there's a store called Hard Off.
Lost in translation.
Yes, lost in translation. It's actually it's a big, huge chain of stores that they have over in Japan. It's a used goods store. They actually have these stores also called Book Off, which they actually have some in the United States that are like a used bookstore. But they moved in and they have this now called Hard Off, which is just hard goods essentially. But they have like 800 stores in Japan, and so they have like a ton of guitars out there. And a lot of times what you see on eBay are actually these resellers they're going through Hard Off and they're cherry picking stuff out of that. But it's worth a look. I mean, Hard Off, unfortunately, you can't buy directly from because there are 800 stores, and they won't accept any credit cards that are outside of Japan and that sort of thing. But so that's one case where these eBay guys can be really helpful with getting you something.
So if you're not going through eBay and you're trying to find something on Reverb or just more in general, let's talk about some of the things that tend to be off about some of these. And it's not just older vintage guitars. I'm not just saying that, but a lot of times, Tony, you pointed out like the necks are just going to be. You got to be really careful about the necks.
Necks, and frets. And, I mean, if you want to really nitpick, sometimes the scale length is a little wonky, too. It's all, I mean, if you know how to evaluate an instrument, especially if you're going to a guitar show or something like that, I think you can find... You probably pretty well know where the trouble spots are. If it's got a giant bow in the neck and it looks like the truss rod might already be maxed out, it's not going to get any better.
Right.
That might be one to avoid. If it looks like it's been, tinkered with or pickups have been changed out and things like that, and you really have your heart set on finding something that's more, original, you might, pass by some of those things. I mean, you can always try to find replacement parts that are out there, but it really is what you're trying to find, I guess. But all of the same things. If you were evaluating any other, whether it's a vintage guitar or a brand new guitar, I mean, you could walk into a Guitar Center and find guitars that aren't set up well there, and maybe with a little tweaking you can make them play better. Same way with some of the vintage things. One of the things I think you fall into is some of these guitars have maybe not been stored properly over the years. I mean, it might be a 50, 60-year-old instrument, and if it sat in a hot attic somewhere, it's going to want to tear itself apart pretty much. It's just things, common sense kinds of things as you're looking through.
Well, I'm reminded of a couple things that I've seen that you've had, that John's had, that Chase has had in his shop, but like just even like some of the older guitars that have bindings, they come in and like all the binding on it is just ready to fall apart.
Yeah.
Be mindful of like heavily bound older guitars.
Yeah, Gretsch's especially. I mean, that's some of those old models. I mean, they were notorious for the rot of the binding.
Right. But that's also, when we started off with the Grecos in the LP style, and I mean, that's a pretty solid guitar. It's not, they didn't make it with so many things that were sort of like, I don't know, frail.
Yeah, no,
it's
a good starting
that's
platform.
a real solid piece of instrument there.
I'd say the main thing to watch out for with any of the Japanese Les Paul style copies is just make sure that you get a lot of good pictures of all angles of it. Sometimes they can have like really sharp angles on the neck. I had an Aria. Actually, it was not a Les Paul. It was a Les Paul style guitar, one of those PE with the violin burst kind of things. It was like their top of the line, their own design type of late 70s things. But the neck angle on that was just so bizarre. It felt weird on my body, because it was angled so sharp from the body.
Right.
It was just a strange design. The other thing is just, of course, do they have bolt-on necks? A lot of these guitars look, hey, it's Les Paul, but it's got a bolt-on neck. Do you want a bolt-on neck?
Right.
And like
right.
that Rock Spirits, like I mentioned, the only telltale sign is that one screw on the back. You got to look carefully sometimes because they might have a picture of the back of the guitar. It might be small and kind of low res, and you got to really look or ask questions, because you might end up thinking that you're getting a set neck guitar and you get it, it's a bolt-on. So that, it may still be a great guitar, but it just may not be what you wanted.
Right. Yeah. And well, fortunately, a lot of the ones that we've been talking about, looking them up, they have, they are loaded with pictures, and probably for that very reason. Like the more, the less pictures there are, the more opportunity there is to hide things.
Yes.
And you just mentioned Aria. I remember I was really early on. I had an Aria Pro 2 style. And it was all black, and it was really cool. And the funny thing is, I might have told this story before. We were doing a thing in college, and it was, for whatever reason, we had to bring something in that was like either meant something to us or we had a talent associated with it. And I didn't really have a ton of talent at that point. Clearly I do now. It's just not in guitar playing. And I brought in that guitar, and I was just like, this is really cool. I like it, and blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't going to spend a bunch of time on it. And there's this kid in the corner with a Merciful Fate shirt.
Oh boy.
And he's like, yeah, but does it have scalloped fretboard? And I was like, what? I didn't know what that was. And he's like, we'll play something on it. And I was like, and then my eye focus got real dark and narrow, and I think I almost passed out.
Michael row the boat ashore.
I was just like, dude, you could have just said cool guitar, but instead he just completely cut my knees out. It was a real jerk move. But
you should have said scallop neck. It's like, why would I want cheese and cream on my neck?
Yeah,
it's a guitar.
I had no idea what he's talking about. I was like, who knows? Yeah, look where I am now, man. So
there you go.
All of my necks are scalloped.
But yeah, you mentioned Aria. I think that's worth talking about. There's some pretty fantastic guitars.
Yeah. And still to this day. And that's the other thing, actually, because, there's a lot of stuff to look at, old stuff. But again, Tokai, here's another reason to do some shopping over in Japan, because the new Tokai Les Pauls are still just killer. And they're $500, $600.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they're sweet. They're and again, if you want something you can go vintage style if you want, or you can go something much more modern. They have some really cool finishes.
Yeah.
Quilting, quilted maple, it's just, wow. I was just looking at some of those and going, these are like $400, $600.
Well, they have one model that I'm looking at right now, which is the Pro 2 TS, which kind of, it's like an offset SG, but without as severe of curve on the horn.
Right.
Man, that's a great looking guitar, and these are neck through bodies on these things.
Yeah.
Which for $429, get out of town.
Well, that's again like the Tokai stuff. It's the material. It's the wood you want. It's rosewood. It's not laurel.
Yeah.
It's rosewood fretboard. Maple and mahogany. It's like it's those classic tone woods. It's not some mystery wood.
Yeah. Well, this is an awful lot to chew on. Oh, you know what? Since we just mentioned it, I think it is worth mentioning, because actually, Aria, the Aria brand. The only reason that I even knew what that was is because John Taylor from Duran Duran played an Aria bass, and he was just like, "Oh, his bass, man, I loved it." But that was neck through. that was neck through body, and a lot of if you go look up the Aria stuff, there's a lot of neck through on it, and it seemed as though why, just out of curiosity, there wasn't neck through, then all of a sudden then there was, and then there wasn't anymore. What's up with that?
Well, it was very much a 70s thing. I mean, that's funny because I've been this musician that I bought first neck through. You know, it was the hippie sandwich, kind of like a limbic thing. They were trying to appeal to Jerry Garcia, you know, and all of his San Francisco guitars, which they were real big into the neck through body stuff there, you know, with Alembic. And I'm trying to remember who the other makers were up there, but that was like a big thing. So they copied that. But then, you know, you had BC Rich. And again, my Aria BC Rich copy, neck through body.
Right.
Goes on and on. It's
And Tony,
I mean,
can you tell us what? I mean, I'm pretty much familiar with it, but for the rest of the audience, the advantage, the alleged advantage of a neck through body.
Well, I mean, it's all one hunk of wood. The bridge and the pickups and the neck are all in one plank.
It's just got two funky wings on the side.
And with two funky wings. And that was, it really was kind of a trend. I mean, even I don't know, Chris, if you remember the Martin solid body electrics.
Oh, sure.
I mean, those were the same thing. Yeah. BC Riches. I mean, all of the... Yeah, there were a number of them, and then a lot of the Aria line that had all the same type of thing. And again, I think it was a trend at the time. Everybody thought, and probably it's true to some degree.
Based on like sustain though, because you're not. It's like the same piece of wood is at the bridge than is at the nut.
Well, if you remember, there was this guy called Les Paul, and his very first guitar he put together was kind of a big plank.
Yes,
and he had cut some hollow body things.
But then it didn't. Then it wasn't that. So
well, it was that.
It was, but then it wasn't.
He was trying to prove that you could make a non-acoustical kind of thing just strictly with electric amplification.
Right.
But that being said, yes. I mean, there was also the trend. Remember all the brass stuff. Brass nut, brass bridge.
But that all kind of happened at the same time.
You did, yeah.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. I pulled one on you, Tony.
And then there was the thing. Remember the thing you clamped onto the headstock? What the hell was that called? It was supposed to increase your sustain.
Oh, the fathead.
Was that the fathead? Yeah.
Yeah.
That one, not so much anymore.
Not so much. Oh,
my
gosh.
But there's some truth to that, though, actually, believe it or not. But, it's like the larger headstocks actually do generally tend to, despite the bad reputation of 70s Fenders, but the larger headstocks generally tend to give you a little bit more robust, lively tone. So don't know why. There's some reason for it, or is it just psychosomatic, whatever, but who knows?
Wow. Well, gentlemen, we've got a lot to talk about, or we did have a lot to talk about. We've talked about a lot. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
I
not so many words.
I was all torn up because I'm looking at this 81 made in Japan Aria Pro 2 that has this beautiful, beautiful honey burst on it, and all of the. I mean, if that had a different name on the headstock, that's like a $9,000 guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gee,
probably.
Christmas. That's bananas. It's $598. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Anyways, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully that stokes your brains to go looking for weird stuff. And just be, maybe not even looking for it, just be aware of it. Wherever, if you go to the used shops, if you're out at a show, if you're just browsing around, look for the stones less unturned. What? You know what I mean?
What?
Right? Anyways.
The Rolling Stones that gather no moss.
Not that.
No.
Yeah, anyways. People out there know.
Yep. If you know, you know.
Yes. Okay. We need to check in on a very specific thing that we do here, which is called what?
Todd, at this point of the show, is a little game we like to play called Would You Rather?
Indeed.
Well, you'll be happy to know it's the return of the hot tub time machine.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we love our hot tub time machine. And earlier we talked about a couple of different things. which you may or may not remember.
I remember every one of them.
But I'm bringing it full circle. So
I get a lot of Rob Corddry that people are like, yeah, they're like that guy. And I'm like, what? How am I? Oh, anyways, go ahead.
It must be the Hives hat you're wearing.
It might be.
This week's Would You Rather, we're heading in the hot tub time machine back to the 1980s. Woo.
All right.
And one destination in particular, the West Coast, also known as California.
Yep.
And
you're bringing me home, baby.
I know. This is all about you. So you have two options on the screen on the hot tub time machine. You can go back to the Mighty Might HQ.
Okay.
And using
that's headquarters. That's street for headquarters, everybody.
That's me. I'm street talking.
HQ, baby.
HQ. And you get your choice of anything in the shop. Any of the parts that you want to put together, blah, 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 blah. Or you can go over to Hollywood to the Carvin store.
Ooh.
And you get to do the same thing. So would you rather take the hot tub time machine back to the Mighty Might or the Carvin place? And what would you come home with?
Oh, golly. Okay. But we're bringing it back to right now times.
We're bringing it back. Now, we have to make sure it's covered in plastic. A giant zip bag, because the hot tub, obviously has moisture.
Right. Now, people, I don't know how familiar people are with Carvin. Sorry, it is late, and we've all had work days, so I'm tripping over.
Well,
my tongue a little
let's
bit.
just say Carvin, after them, they were established in the 1950s and the 60s, but by the 1980s, they were predominantly known for some of their production instruments, but they also were known for parts and speakers and all the stuff.
Amps.
And amps.
A lot of amps.
You could go to the Hollywood store and say, I want that, and that.
Right, but they weren't like an off the wall. I mean, you had to go and you could get them made and stuff.
Predominantly mail order.
Yeah. It's almost, I would say, exclusively.
Shop.
Yeah.
Then they had one in Costa Mesa later, but...
Okay. Well, that was until the 90s.
Right.
We're in the 1980s now.
Yes.
So pay attention to the storyline.
I'm paying attention.
Okay.
All right.
Shall I go first?
Please go first.
I think I would rather go to the Carvin store. And the one thing that I just love about Carvin pickups are the 24 pull piece humbuckers. they're just crazy. It's so unnecessary and over the top. But I love that. And I really, over the years, have fallen in love with their telly style. A lot of them are set neck telly kind of instruments. And I think they might have had those around in the 1980s. I can't remember what. But that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
That's what I want. And that's what I'm getting.
Okay. How about you, Chris?
Well, funny thing, because I lived in California in the early 80s. And even more interesting, I grew up in North San Diego County, and the Carvin factory was one town over from where I grew up and went to high school. And my first amp was a Carvin. It was, super, well, I wouldn't say super cheap, but much more affordable.
Yeah. So
the first amp I bought was a Carvin. It was kind of a weird hybrid solid state preamp. And, it was a 6CA7, Sylvania 6CA7s for the power section. With the graphic EQ in it. And I could get Metallica tones before there was Metallica. I could do the scooped V thing. And I learned that, it sounds great for rhythm, but when you go to play a lead, you vanish, and you couldn't switch it on and off, so that was a no-go. But I have to say, I dug their guitars. I dug, like, they had all those natural wood double cutaway.
Yeah. A lot of neck through stuff.
The DC-20. But I'd have to go with the Mighty Might stuff because in these intervening years, I think it's just more my speed to get, the DIY Strat type of thing and those humbucking pickups, which I mentioned, that's been my thing now. As I've been collecting those. and just searching on the sound. And I think they're kind of one of the great overlooked and forgotten brands of that era. And they did play such a major role in the whole DIY thing. Now, I mean, Carvin did to a certain extent too. I got parts from Carvin. I will say that I got some bridges. Mm-hmm. I went to go see one of my relatives in Ohio who had an appliance shop out in West Jefferson, just outside of Columbus.
Oh, yeah. Just out there, literally a 20-minute drive from where we are.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and he had an appliance store out there, and he had what I've just recently learned was a Kawai. The 60s Kawai. It had no name on the headstock or whatever, but he had no bridge, Mm-hmm. So I went to Carvin and got a bridge, and those pickups were something. And all, my friends we played Carvins or Japanese guitars, basically.
Yeah.
So I'd have to go with Mighty Might, I think, more for the just that was not so much in my sphere, and that's a little bit more in my interest these days. So I kind of, with Carvin, been there, kind of done that.
Are you going to go with the unpolished brass hardware?
Yeah, it's funny because I have a lot of that unpolished brass. I went to Stars Guitars back in the day up in San Francisco and got the nut blanks, the Gibson nut blanks, brass nut blanks, $1 a piece. I have like about 10 of those.
Oh my God!
I have Stars Guitars brass bridges, a bunch of that stuff. So I never could put it on my SG. I just couldn't go there.
Yeah,
wow.
You gotta draw the line somewhere.
Yeah.
All right.
And
So
that had that brass sustain block.
Uh-huh.
That was like, it was embedded underneath the bridge, like a big piece of brass, and it had a half brass and half bone nut and everything like that. So that kind of got my brass tacks.
What about you, Todd?
Well, at first I was going to go for Carvin because that was a big name when I was growing up in California myself. And my close friend Dave Bays had this really cool black Carvin with like a diamond-shaped headstock. And I just remember going like, that thing's really cool. Mm-hmm. And he was pretty good at playing it. And I was just learning, and I was garbage. And I always thought, well, okay, then that's what I need to get that so I can sound good. But in retrospect, I think at this point I would go back and get some nice Mighty Might stuff. A lot of the Carvin stuff is very ornate, sort of like not my vibe. And I'd probably do that and do some kind of wacky, fun like rat rod style telly or something.
No, it has to be a Strat.
No, it can't. No.
Did I mention it had to be a Strat?
If it's a Strat, I'll just cut the lower horn off and call it a day.
There you go.
Mean, the upper horn.
Cut the upper horn off.
Yes.
Great.
Anyways, okay, that's a good one, Tony.
Yep.
We need to thank a few people and let Chris get back to his actual life.
That is true. Well, at this point of the show, there's a special group of people we love to thank. These are our executive producers. Now, an executive producer makes this show possible. How do you become one? Quite simple. Head over to patreon.com/the Guitar Knobs. Check out a couple different levels in which you can participate, become a friend, a hero, an all-around nice person to the podcast. Each level comes with some very nice thank you gifts and opportunities to win special giveaways.
That is correctamundo.
But in addition to all that great stuff, there's one thing more. What would that be? Translated to, you get to have your name read on the thing. That's what I'm going to do right now. So special thanks to these executive producers: John Sebastian, Trevor Ellenberg, Cameron Pampas, James Bell, Brett Hogarth, Gregory Randall, Don Kloss, Ralph Gottschalk from Wonderful Audio Technology. What? Rusty Sneeden, Vader and Pedals, John Halverson, Rick Calhoun, Trevor Gunberg, Elad Mizrahi, Richard Kendall, James White, Justin Jones, John Esterly from Rare Effects. You like how I do that?
No.
I know you don't. That's why I do it. Anthony Lathrop, Stefan Lamb, Michael Senchuk, Ken Sayers, Darren Gregory, Tom Brazen, Eric Merrow, and Pluto.
Yes.
But wait,
Thank
Todd.
you so much. Yes.
There's more.
Oh, good.
Because we have a special group of executive producers. We call them our Grand Poobahs. These are the creme de la creme, the top of the heap, the A number ones. And they wear a fez upon their head whilst listening to the podcast. Like this one, for instance. So special thanks to these Grand Poobahs. Anthony Gemolero, Billy Spitfire Unlimited, Bob Crouch, Brian Robinson, Cody Foster, David Kaminga, David Tyndall, Enrico Fernando, Fox Hill Studio, Hex Matos, James Pennington, John Williams, LSJ Music Company, Matt Hart, Michael Van Zant, Michio Murakishi, Moon Guitars, Paul Von Eppinger, Sam Jett, Steve Keys, Tyler Casey Rhines, Zach Oswald from Brandon Wound Pickups, and Pedro Vasquez. Thank you. Thank you
all very much. We couldn't do it without you. Say it every time. We mean it.
Yeah, we do mean it.
Absolutely. Chris Gill, thank you so much for spending your time. We need to give a great big thank you for sharing your knowledge and keeping us entertained as always.
Thanks, guys. Tony, Todd, it's always good to talk with you guys, and keep it up.
Thank you.
It's good to keep the community informed.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
indeed. Now, where can people find the things that you're doing?
Probably my Instagram is probably the best place. I don't update it too much, but I try to get there. So that's Chris Gill VH Writer on Instagram. So that's all, one thing all mashed together.
Got it. And if people want to get that book, where can they get that book?
Oh, it's all the usual suspects. Definitely on Amazon, as always. Paperback, hardcover, Kindle, and audiobook.
Oof.
And Barnes & Noble, you can get it at least online. And some stores have it, some stores don't.
Sure.
But yeah, basically all the usual places.
Excellent.
How about if I want to order the special double secret edition?
Huh?
Oh, that's you can't get that.
Yeah.
Damn.
It's too expensive.
Yes. Tony, where can people find you?
Send about a dozen Grecos my way.
Yes.
Done.
Yes. What about you, Tony?
Head over to pickguardian.com. Check out some of the things that I do. What do? I make custom pick guards for guitars. How do you get one? Shoot me an email. Let me know what you're trying to do, what you need, colors, all the fun stuff. I'll take real good care of you. It's your
Can you do a
opportunity.
65 SG?
Can I do a 65 SG?
Yeah.
Why not?
Cool.
How many ply do you want on that? You want a 5?
That would be, was it a 5-ply? Yeah, I think so. The problem with those things is like when I bought mine, it was already warped. And then I swapped it out with one of my friend's part guys, and he got me one, but it wasn't really the right. It was like a 70s one, and it wasn't right, and then I got one, it was a 63. I was wrong. So,
yeah.
And then that one warped. So,
Wow.
Well, I'll tell you what, just bring your guitar over next time you're in town.
Yeah.
okay.
We'll fix it.
Don't leave it in your car's back window either. That'll,
I have done that. It got very
As I was about to say,
Yes?
it's your opportunity to make your guitar even more yours.
That's right. You can shoot me a DM on Instagram. We would love to hear from you. Send us your Would You Rather. Tell us what you love about the show. Tell us what you hate about the show. Make fun of Tony and
Throw rocks at
all of
Todd.
the things. Throw rocks at me. Legitimately, connect with us. We love connecting with you, so please do it. And we would appreciate it. Tell somebody about the show. If nothing else, grab your nearest guitar buddy by the collar and say, "Gotta listen to the show, man." And Chris, we're gonna have you on again for a 5-peat.
And you'll get that
At
corduroy
some-
jacket.
at some point in time as we come up with more awesome topics to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, have a fantastic guitar week and subscribe.
Yeah.
Hanging around, just hanging around.
do scoops.
Are you able to talk about this on the show?
I don't know if I want to
Doesn't
talk
sound
about
like it.
this. Yeah, because it's.
I take that as no.
Yeah, like a coffee table style, man.
Yeah.
A coffee table book about coffee tables.
Oh, shut it, Tony. You've already started the lowest possible hanging fruit.
I love.
And why they're overlooked and what you should also be careful of.
True.
That kind of thing.
Yes, I know what to be careful of.
Yes.
I've already bought those.
Yeah.
You want? I should have some of my boys make a visit.
Tony went to go get some crackers for my cheese. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have a would you rather?
Yes.
No?
Oh my God. If it's so easy, why don't you come up with one?
Well, I have in the past. We'll see. Yeah.
Let's see how it feels.
Yeah. Between your and Tony's knowledge, like this is the benefit. Like I honestly, I say this with the most respect and sincerity. I enjoy do what tickles your toenails, man. That's your bag
Or
of
if you don't
chips.
want to do one, you don't have to do
he's
one.
got two.
As I've always said, I've got over 500 effects pedals, so I can do these things all day long.
Yeah.
Hey,
Super
Pete,
cool.
Pete Rose just died.
What?
Pete Rose just died.
For real?
Yeah.
Wow.
Just came across the.
Holy mackerel. How cool is it though that you could do the thing that you just like, I don't know, this is what I do. And then an entire move in America's greatest game is synonymous with your name. You don't even have to say what it is. What did you do? If you fell down a flight of stairs, I Pete Rosed. Head first, hands up, right into the base. Bang! It's amazing. I think that's cool. I wish I had that. Without further ado, and away we go.
Well, that's it for these knobs. Please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/theguitarknobs. Visit our website at theguitarknobs.com for all of our past episodes, 4 on the Floor blog, and other good stuff. You can connect with us on social too at our Facebook page and share your gear and stories on our Facebook group. Also, be sure to check out our Instagram at Guitar Knobs. Catch you next time.